There is a truth Machiavelli saw with absolute clarity more than 500 years ago. Most men lose their power not because they are weak, but because they react too quickly to things that don't deserve a reaction. They get angry, they argue, they try to prove they are strong, and it is precisely that ego that makes them predictable, manipulable, and ultimately easy to defeat. But there is another kind of man, quiet, unreadable, the kind that keeps everyone around him on guard. He doesn't need to win every argument. He wins by refusing to step into meaningless battles. And it is this skill of strategic withdrawal that becomes the very thing others truly fear. In this video, you will uncover the art of silent power that Machiavelli considered the foundation for ruling human beings, how to control your emotions, how to make your opponent doubt themselves, and how to turn silence into the sharpest weapon you possess. If you want to become the kind of man your opponents cannot predict, cannot control, and do not dare provoke, then this is the lesson that will change your life. Number 1. 2 types of men, through the eyes of Machiavelli. If Niccolo Machiavelli were to stand before these 2 types of men, he would not see them as 2 personalities, but as 2 opposing models of power. One is a ruler driven by instinct. The other is a ruler who understands human nature and exploits it to hold the upper hand. With the cold gaze of a political thinker, Machiavelli would immediately recognize this. The real battle does not lie in the insult, but in how a man governs himself. The first type, the man who reacts instantly, is exactly the kind of ruler Machiavelli considered the weakest. Not weak because he lacks strength, but because he cannot control his emotions. He believes every insult is a threat to his honor, and so he strikes back immediately. In his logic, not responding means losing power. But this is the trap of those who lack political realism. Machiavelli once wrote that a ruler needs the fear of his subjects, not their love. But what many fail to understand is this: fear only exists when people cannot predict your reaction. The man who reacts instantly, loudly and angrily, is the most predictable man of all, and therefore never truly feared. If an enemy can trigger him with a single word, then the power lies in the enemy's hands, not his. Such a ruler, in Machiavellian logic, never holds power for long because he scatters his strength across conflicts unworthy of his attention. He fights to protect his image, not to achieve a greater objective. And anyone who fights for image will exhaust himself, leaving his mind exposed and ripe for manipulation. Opposite him stands the second type, the silent man. If Machiavelli had to choose one of the 2 to rule a city-state, he would choose the second without hesitation. Not because the silent man is gentle, but because true power is forged in the ability to restrain one's reactions. When insulted, he does not rush into battle, he observes. Not because he is weak, but because he understands that the wise never let others know what they are thinking. In politics, Machiavelli knew that every reaction reveals strategy, and the most capable ruler is the one who knows how to conceal his true intentions. The silent man embodies this philosophy. He reveals no motive, offers no information, gives no indication of which direction he will move. His silence creates a void that others are forced to fill with fear, doubt, and unease. Thus, through the eyes of Machiavelli, the difference between these 2 types of men is not merely personality. It is the difference between a man destined to be ruled and a man born to rule. Number 2. Victory does not come from fighting every battle, but from choosing the battle. Machiavelli viewed the world through the eyes of a man surrounded by endless schemes. To him, every action, especially one's reaction to conflict, was a display of one's capacity to rule. And when he studied Renaissance leaders, Machiavelli extracted a brutal rule. Men who fight over everything are men who dig their own graves. He witnessed Florence, Milan, Venice, and powerful families like the Medici and the Borgias rise and fall, depending on how they handled conflict. And what Machiavelli saw most clearly was this: failure rarely came from strong enemies. It came from the leader's own impatience. 1. Reacting emotionally is a form of political suicide. In Machiavelli's eyes, the man eager to respond to every insult could never be a prince. Because he treats conflict as a battle of honor. He must constantly save face. He fears being disrespected more than he fears losing strategy. What he doesn't understand is this: true honor does not come from defending yourself with words. It comes from power. A prince who is provoked by trivial insults is no different from a soldier who trembles at the sound of steel. It is a sign of inner instability, something enemies can exploit. Machiavelli believed such men let emotion drive the carriage of power, and therefore they will always lose to those who know when silence is the sharpest shield. 2. The strong do not fight for pride, they fight for purpose. Standing opposite them, Machiavelli praised the man who practices prudenza, practical wisdom. Such a man is not guided by insult. He asks himself, does this battle increase my power? Will its outcome change my position? Or is it nothing more than a pointless dispute that drains my strength? If the answer is no, he walks away, even if walking away makes him look weak. Because Machiavelli understood, appearing weak in the eyes of the crowd can sometimes be the perfect disguise for true strength. A competent ruler does not care what others think of him in every moment. He cares about the endgame. And the endgame is secured only when he refuses to scatter his energy across small battles that gain him nothing. 3. Only the man who controls himself can control others. Machiavelli warned, "He who cannot rule himself cannot rule others." The man who knows how to ignore meaningless conflict possesses the highest form of power, the power of self-restraint. When he withdraws from a pointless fight, he is preserving his resources, preserving his image, and most importantly, exerting invisible pressure on his opponent. Machiavelli understood deeply that silence can be more dangerous than a declaration of war. Because when you remain silent, the enemy becomes trapped in the stories their own fears create. 4. Therefore, choosing the battle, not fighting the battle, marks the man who will win. From Machiavelli's perspective, the most formidable man is not the aggressive one, but the one who knows when to stand still. That stillness is not passivity, it is strategy. It is the declaration: I act only when victory is certain, when the outcome elevates my position, and when the price is worth paying. In other words, the victor is not the man who fights many battles, but the man who fights only the battles he cannot lose. Number 3. The root of weakness is dependence on the eyes of others. In The Prince, Machiavelli never explicitly uses the word weakness, but anyone who reads him closely understands this. Weakness is what happens when inner power is replaced by dependence on how others see you. And if we shine that perspective onto modern life, we immediately see why most men react to every insult. They do not live for purpose. They live for approval. Machiavelli wrote that the masses judge more by appearances than by reality, and that a wise ruler must use this to his advantage. But he also warned, if a leader cares too much about praise or criticism, he becomes a prisoner of the crowd. The irony is that many men today behave exactly like bad rulers. They do not control their image. they let others control it for them. 1. When ego replaces reason. The ego, to Machiavelli, is not something to eliminate, but something to monitor with vigilance. A prince guided by emotion will always choose the react immediately response, because in that moment, he believes he must prove his worth. But a prince ruled by his ego is the easiest to defeat, because he will fight when he should not fight, wasting his strength on conflicts that produce no real power. Modern men fall into the same trap. They battle over a comment online, a condescending look, or a disrespectful remark. Not because the issue matters, but because they cannot tolerate being belittled. He reacts to be validated, but that very hunger for validation turns him into a slave. 2. Dependence on others' approval is the most injurious form of slavery. Machiavelli understood. The man who depends on others' judgment can never hold power. Such a prince will be led by surrounding opinions instead of deciding based on what strengthens his rule. In modern life, this plays out in familiar patterns. One insult ruins a man's entire day. A negative comment throws him off balance. A disrespectful glance forces him to defend his honor. But for Machiavelli, true honor does not lie in how others perceive you. It lies in your ability to maintain and expand your power. The man who gets dragged into every petty conflict resembles failed rulers of the past. They drain their strength on meaningless battles until the real war arrives, and they have nothing left to use. 3. The strong are never controlled by the emotions of others. Machiavelli would look at the silent man and say, "Here is someone who understands human nature." He does not react because he does not need validation. He does not rage because he knows anger is a gift to the enemy. He does not explain himself because he understands that an explanation is an admission of the questioner's power. And from a Machiavellian perspective, the rule is simple. He who controls himself will control the whirlpool. He who lets the world control his emotions will forever remain beneath it. 4. Why withdrawal instills more fear than counterattacking. If Machiavelli had watched the Italian princes of the Renaissance clash on the treacherous stage of politics, he would have recognized one truth: a timely retreat can plant deeper fear than an advancing army. Power does not lie only in action. It lies in the ability to make others uncertain about what comes next. 1. People fear what they do not understand. Machiavelli wrote that men judge by appearances, and few reach the essence. Yet when a man is insulted yet does not react, he shatters every expectation of normal behavior. The opponent anticipates anger, justification, argument, the usual signals that reveal strength and weakness. But when they receive nothing, the opponent is left without data. And according to Machiavelli, when information disappears, fear rushes in to take its place. The abandoned opponent begins to ask himself, is he silent because he despises me? Or is he calculating a far more dangerous strike? Did I just create an enemy whose strength I do not understand? This uncertainty is the seed of fear, the kind born from power. 2. Withdrawal denies the opponent closure. It denies them victory. Machiavelli understood a crucial psychological rule. Human beings need closure to feel safe. In war, a concluded battle lets both sides know who won and who lost. That clarity comforts the crowd. But when a man silently steps away from conflict, he grants his opponent no ending at all. No victory, no defeat, no resolution. This traps the opponent in the most dangerous state, not knowing what they have triggered. An enemy you know you've defeated is less frightening than an enemy who is silent and somewhere just out of sight. 3. Silence is a veil that conceals intention, a tactic Machiavelli called superior strategy. In The Prince, Machiavelli emphasizes that a wise ruler must keep his true objectives hidden, because unpredictability itself is a source of power. The man who chooses to withdraw is not weakening. He is concealing his intentions and forcing the opponent to live in uncertainty. The less you speak, the fewer reactions you reveal, the more the opponent is forced to imagine the worst. Humans always imagine the darkest possibilities when they lack information, and Machiavelli exploited this instinct as a political weapon. Thus, silence becomes a form of invisible threat. 4. Withdrawal is not disappearance. It is the stripping away of control. When a man refuses to react, he deprives the opponent of the one power they crave most, the power to control his emotions and behavior. In Machiavelli's world, power is partly measured by your ability to make others react in ways that serve your interests. Therefore, withdrawal is not abandoning the battlefield. It is refusing to play by the opponent's rules, forcing them instead to wander in the maze created by your silence. And when the opponent cannot control your reactions, they begin to fear you. 5. Distance creates mystique. Machiavelli knew that the greatest strength of a prince is maintaining enough distance that others cannot see his weaknesses. And the silent man accomplishes the same thing. He becomes difficult to access, difficult to interpret, and therefore easy to mythologize. A person who mythologizes you will assign you more power than you actually possess. And that is the moment power quietly shifts into the hands of the one who knows how to withdraw. Number 5. When to withdraw, when to fight. The art of choosing battles according to Machiavelli. In Machiavelli's eyes, a ruler never fights out of emotion. He fights only when victory brings more power, and he withdraws only when retreat strengthens his long-term position. The art of choosing battles, therefore, is the skill that separates the ruler from the ruled. And this is where Machiavelli's cold practicality shines. A battle is worth fighting only if it serves the ultimate goal, power and the stability of the realm. 1. Withdraw when the battle comes from provocation, not strategy. According to Machiavelli, the man who is easily provoked is the man easily defeated. If a conflict begins from personal insult, jealousy, or meaningless challenge, it is not a battle, it is a trap. Foolish rulers fall into this trap because they fear being seen as weak. But Machiavelli stresses, a prince never acts to protect the opinion of the crowd, he acts to protect his power. If he fights only to prove himself, he withdraws. If he fights only to soothe his ego, he withdraws. If he fights only to satisfy his temper, he withdraws. Such withdrawal is not defeat. It is the refusal to fight on a stage designed to drain his power. 2. Fight only when the threat touches the foundation of your power. Machiavelli viewed the world through the axis of protect power, expand power, and only threats that truly endanger political reputation, social standing, control, long-term influence are worthy of a prince's intervention. In modern life, the same principles apply. Is someone capable of damaging your reputation among people who matter? Consider fighting. Is someone obstructing your career objectives? Strategize a response. Is someone threatening your assets, status, or strategic credibility? You must act. For Machiavelli, fighting is never a reaction. It is a deliberate strategic decision. 3. Withdraw when conditions are unfavorable. Fight only when you hold the advantage. A wise man never fights by the opponent's rules. If the battle takes place on the opponent's ground, where they control public opinion, resources, or circumstances, Machiavelli advises immediate withdrawal. Conversely, a prince fights only when he holds superior information, he chooses the moment, he engineers surprise, he can strike once and win decisively. Fighting on equal terms is foolish. Fighting with overwhelming advantage is wisdom. 4. Fight when silence will breed disrespect. Withdraw when fighting will cost you dignity. Machiavelli understood a subtle truth. The real danger does not lie in an insult, but in precedent. If someone insults you publicly and you withdraw, that precedent may encourage others to test you. In such cases, action, even small, is necessary to maintain fear and respect. Conversely, if the conflict occurs in the shadows, where no one sees and no one cares, acting is a waste of power. 5. The essence: fight to preserve power, withdraw to accumulate power. For Machiavelli, every battle must answer one question: does this action increase my power? If yes, fight. If no, withdraw. A wise prince knows that power is not built through scattered small victories, but through the ability to endure and prevail in the battles that truly matter. Withdrawal, therefore, is not escape. It is the gathering of strength for the battle that comes at the right moment, the battle he cannot but afford to lose. Number 6. The art of withdrawal, when absence becomes a weapon of power. In The Prince, Machiavelli repeatedly emphasized that power lies not only in what a ruler does, but in what he chooses not to do. In this sense, withdrawal is not the retreat of the defeated. It is a deliberate move to shape the perceptions of others. And in many cases, withdrawal becomes the silent yet sharpest strike a man can deliver. 1. Withdrawal is not disappearance. It is the control of access. A wise prince never allows himself to be seen too often. Machiavelli understood that easy access diminishes value. When subjects feel they can approach the prince at any time, they take his presence for granted. Conversely, when he limits who may reach him, his rarity creates an invisible aura of authority. Modern men are no different. When a man withdraws from conflict, from pointless debates, from the chaos others try to drag him into, his absence does not make him smaller. It makes him harder to reach, harder to read, harder to replace. 2. Withdrawal forces the opponent to interrogate themselves. When someone receives no reaction from you, they have no one left to fight except their own insecurities. Machiavelli understood that people fear the thoughts they create far more than any real attack. A spoken insult answered is a duel closed. A spoken insult ignored becomes a labyrinth of questions. And when there are no answers, people spiral into doubt. Does he disdain me so much he won't respond? Is he silently preparing something? Did I provoke someone I should not have provoked? Machiavelli would say, when your opponent begins questioning themselves, you have won without lifting a blade. 3. Withdrawal makes others chase your value. One of Machiavelli's enduring principles. Value is not inherent. It is determined by how much others must struggle to access you. A man who constantly argues, constantly shows up, constantly reacts becomes predictable, and therefore taken for granted. But a man who knows how to withdraw, who knows when to stop responding, when to stay silent, when to disappear, forces others to recognize that his presence is not guaranteed. And humans by nature crave what they cannot fully possess. 4. Withdrawal is the recalibration of power in every relationship, political, social, romantic. The one who is always available becomes the weaker party because he is perceived as eager. The one who withdraws at the right moment forces others to adjust their behavior, measure their words, and reevaluate how they treat him. Machiavelli would note instantly, deliberate withdrawal is a method of forcing respect, sometimes more effective than overt strength. 5. Absence sometimes screams louder than presence. Machiavelli once said, "If you cannot make them love you, make them fear losing you." Withdrawal is the seed of this fear. They don't fear you. They fear the void you leave behind, the space you once filled in the conversation, the influence you once had within the group, the attention you once gave them. Human beings value what they lose more than what they have. And when your silence makes them realize this, you ascend to the highest tier of Machiavellian power, ruling through distance. Number 7. The final victor, the man who does not need to fight. If Machiavelli had to summarize the art of power in a man, he would say this: the true victor is not the one who defeats the most enemies, but the one who needs to defeat no one, yet everyone remains wary of him. This is the pinnacle of rulership, and the line separating the ordinary man from the dangerous one in the political and psychological sense. 1. The man who must fight often is the man who lacks real power. Throughout history, Machiavelli never glorified generals who were constantly on the battlefield. He glorified rulers who made their enemies too afraid to start a battle in the first place. A prince who must prove his strength with sword and blood is one who has already failed in the art of governing long before the battle begins. Modern men are no different. If he constantly needs to explain himself, constantly needs to argue, constantly needs to prove his worth, then he has no inner power. He survives through reaction, not authority. He stands forever on the defensive, always pulled into conflict on stages built by others. Machiavelli would say, such a man cannot rule anyone, he cannot even rule himself. 2. The true victor is the one who makes others regulate themselves around him. The man who practices strategic withdrawal produces a phenomenon. Machiavelli valued immensely. Others adjust themselves to accommodate him. They speak more carefully, act more cautiously, fear making mistakes, avoid provoking him, and ultimately, they elevate him above the position he actually holds. This is the clearest expression of power, not forcing others to obey you, but making them choose to obey on their own. 3. The most dangerous man is the one not ruled by emotion. Machiavelli distrusted impulsive rulers, those who treated emotion as fuel. A man who chooses withdrawal over reaction is a man who has conquered humanity's weakest instinct, the urge for immediate self-affirmation. Once a man escapes the grip of emotion, he becomes unpredictable, untouchable, unprovocable, undefeatable. Such a man, Machiavelli would argue, is more dangerous than any army, for he fights with reason and silence, weapons the hot-headed cannot counter. 4. Silence becomes the most sustainable strategy. Withdrawal can happen in seconds when someone insults you, or across months when you remove yourself from a toxic relationship. At every scale, the effect is the same. The space you create forces others to reevaluate your place in their lives. An argument can be won or lost. A battle can end. But absence, especially deliberate absence, can haunt forever. Machiavelli would call this a form of power that cannot be counterattacked, because no one can defeat an opponent who refuses to step onto the battlefield. 5. The man who does not need to fight becomes untouchable. When you no longer need reactions to prove your worth, when you withdraw to preserve your energy, when others must guess what goes on inside your mind, you reach the highest state of power. Others fear losing you more than you fear losing them. This is the absolute victory Machiavelli spoke of, Not victory on the battlefield, but victory in the enemy's mind. When a man reaches this level, he no longer needs to fight for anything. His existence is already a declaration. In a world where everyone wants to speak, to argue, to prove they are right, the strongest man is the one who needs none of that. Machiavelli revealed, power does not lie in shouting, but in protecting what others try to steal: your energy, your calm, your autonomy. The skill that instills fear is not attack. It is self-control. It is deliberate silence. It is the ability to walk away from meaningless battles with a calmness that disarms your opponent. When you refuse to react as they expect, you collapse their entire strategy. And from that moment, power shifts to you. Remember, weak men fight to be acknowledged. Strong men withdraw because they have nothing to prove. If you want to be the kind of man others respect instead of belittle, fear losing instead of take for granted, practice this skill every day. Control yourself, and you will control the world. See you in the next video.